All right, so I titled this Leveraging Labor Market Information because really we're just using the data that exists to do better work in our jobs and our positions to help people, especially job seekers, really use the best information available to make the best decisions available. And that's kind of the goal of labor market information. A lot of you are familiar with what DEED is. We're the Department of Employment and Economic Development, and we are the state's workforce development, economic development agency. Within DEED is the Labor Market Information Office, and that's where I am housed. And our whole goal is to publish, produce analysis, and share labor market information that anybody in the state of Minnesota can use in their work, for their personal use, anything that can be a benefit to make good, sound decisions. So what are we going to do today? A little agenda here. I'm going to talk a little bit about LMI concepts. Most of you are familiar with DEED or work there. I'm going to give a little bit of a labor market update. So that's going to be a combination of some of the tools that we're going to look at, but also some that we're not going to focus on as much, kind of combining them to show you how some of the data can work in action. And yes, it's Allie, is that correct? Is that how I pronounce your name? Allie.
You got it right. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I will share the presentation and slides later. And that is a good question because I'm going to go through a lot of information pretty quickly. So if you maybe the chart goes by too fast and you couldn't read everything, don't worry about it. You'll have plenty of time after to go through at your own pace.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. So I'm going to give that labor market update. And then we're going to, the meat of today is really going to be walking through some of those most popular tools. And there'll be a little time for you to kind of go along with and practice as we go through. And I listed some of the tools that I hope to get to. Again, I'm going to get through as many tools as we can, and I want to make sure we answer those questions. But these are the ones that I hope to focus on. And you'll know what all these acronyms stand for, hopefully, by the end of today. I mentioned the Labor Market Information Office, LMI, that's who we are. Each state has an LMI office, and we are all mandated to produce some labor market information. Minnesota kind of goes a little bit above and beyond in what we produce, but the things that every state does produce on a monthly basis are the unemployment rates. I think that's kind of the top line data that everybody's familiar with, along with the jobs. So each month we produce an estimate of jobs, the number of unemployed, number of people in the labor market, in the labor force. But in addition to that, we produce a ton of different other metrics, including wages, salaries, employment projections, career pathways, educational attainment requirements, etc. And we put all these information together, and that is where the power of LMI comes from. It's using the information to make market responsive and well-informed database decisions. There are several of us, regional analysts throughout the state. So for each planning region, if you're familiar with those geographies, you can see the rest of the crew here. And we did just hire somebody for Northwest. We had that vacancy for a while. So there will be someone in Northwest Minnesota joining us soon. So we're really excited about that. So stay tuned if you have any clients or anyone that works in Northwest. I'm excited for that. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the data sources themselves. So our data can be split into two different types of sources. We have survey-based data and we have census and administrative-based data. Survey-based data is where you're probably familiar with a survey. And that's basically where we reach out to a sample of folks or a sample of households, and we use that sample to try and say something about the larger population. And some of the data that we produce monthly are survey-based, such as current employment statistics, our local area unemployment statistics, or we call LOUS. That's where we get our unemployment numbers from. Our job vacancy survey is a survey, and occupational employment and wage statistics, which is kind of one of our core data sources and data tools, is also survey-based. On the other hand, you've probably heard of the U.S. Census, or the 10-year decennial census. That's trying to reach out to every single household, every single person in the U.S. So that is a census, and that's everybody. And we have some other data that kind of strive to do that as well. Our QCEW, or Quarterly Census of Employment and Wages, which is industry employment and wage statistics. We use unemployment insurance information and records that employers have to submit every month and every quarter to produce really detailed and rich data on wages and employment by industry, and that's an administrative data source. Similarly, our QED, Quarterly Employment Demographics, and our Graduate Employment Outcomes tools use administrative data sources, and they are really powerful and robust as a result. So what do we do with all this information that we have? And there's a lot of it. We create new tools, so we combine different data sources. There's a lot of value in that. It also kind of saves people from having to jump from tool to tool. We write a lot and we conduct presentations on the information. But we also collaborate with people like you, stakeholders, to make sure that we all understand the different trends and how these data can be useful to you, most useful to you and other folks that use the data most often. And data requests. Sheila mentioned at the beginning that you reach out and kind of request data. That's one thing that we also use the information for. I can find data typically a lot faster, and if it saves you some time, I'm happy to, go find some information for you. Thank you for the reminder, Sheila, to mute the microphones. Hopefully the sound isn't coming from my end. A little bit on the geography that we have and based on a lot of our data on. I mentioned planning regions. You may be familiar with your workforce service areas, workforce development board areas. And put this up here just because the geography does differ based on the tool where the data are available. That was another point I think that Sheila made. And not all data are available at the county level or at the metropolitan statistical area level. So I put this out here just to show you that most of our data are available at least the planning area, so the upper right, and then a lot of them are also available for the economic development regions. In Northeast Minnesota, they're the same thing, they're coincidence. So economic development region 3 is the same thing as Northeast planning region. And then within that, we have 2 workforce service areas, Northeast Minnesota, which is everything outside of Duluth. And then Duluth is really unique in Minnesota. It's the only city really that has its own, at least outside of the metro, has its own workforce service area. We get our data from a ton of different sources. Some of the biggest ones are the Bureau of Labor Statistics, United States Census Bureau. Within the Census Bureau, the American Community Survey has a lot of great demographic data that we use. But then Career One Stop is kind of we share data with them. They share data with us, MinnesotaWorks.net. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with there in terms of job posting information. The Federal Reserve Bank has great data on what job seekers are looking for currently. The Bureau of Economic Analysis and the State Demographic Center. I talked a bit about those different types of data sources. A little more detail on the survey-based data. Our current employment statistics, that's where our jobs numbers come from. That's monthly. LAUS, our local area unemployment statistics, that's also on a monthly basis, but not all of our data are published that often. Job vacancy survey is published twice a year in Q2 and Q4. And then our occupational employment and wage statistics are just published once a year in Q1. So that kind of represents the previous year. So our most up-to-date occupational employment and wage statistics, it's for 2022, but it's representing data from 2021 and before. Our UI statistics, unemployment insurance, again, it's a census and administrative data based source that's updated monthly. Quarterly census of employment and wages and our quarterly employment demographics, it's in the name, 4 times a year. And then our graduate employment outcomes is updated annually. All right, so I'm going to give a little bit of a labor market update. This is where I mentioned you're going to see a lot of charts and tables and numbers. Don't stress if you're not able to grasp everything that's going on the screen. I tend to put too much on there, knowing that I'm going to send out data afterward. So I'm just going to give you overviews. If you do have questions, don't hesitate to ask, but also know that you will get this material afterward. And I try to make light of maybe overloading the data and the visualizations. So you'll have to excuse the cartoon references. All right, so Minnesota's labor market situation. I'd like to start off with the unemployment rates. That's kind of the top line number that everybody seems to agree is a good indicator of what is happening in the labor market. And it just represents the people who are not working but looking for work in the state. And as of April, we published the May numbers as of 19 minutes ago, but I don't have them because I was preparing for this presentation. But as of April, Northeast Minnesota's unemployment rate was sitting at about 2.4%, which is a record low. And City of Duluth was in the 1% range, 1.4%, which is also a record low. So we're seeing record lows across the state as a lot of people who are looking for work are finding work, but also our labor force has decreased. So what is labor force, though? Throw that term around and we throw unemployment around, but there are actually definitions for these two things. The labor force consists of the civilian non-institutional population 16 and older. So you can be in the labor force if you are in that group, 16 and older, not incarcerated, say, in civilian non-institutional population. So that's what the labor force is. And then within the labor force, you can either be employed or unemployed. If you're employed, you have a job. If you're unemployed, it gets a little more complicated. The traditional unemployment rate that we publish every month is based off of the definition. And this is a BLS calls households and asks people these questions every month. And this is how they get the information. But unemployed is you're not working, but you have looked for work in the last 4 weeks. So that's how we define the traditional U3 unemployment rate. But there are different ways to define unemployment that go into long-term unemployment, folks that maybe would want a job if a job came up, but they haven't looked in the last 4 weeks, etc. But typically, you're either in the labor force if you are employed or you're unemployed and have looked for a job recently. Otherwise, you're deemed to be outside of the labor force. And then people outside the labor force can get divided into a couple of different groups. Long-term unemployment generally is one of them. We call that, discouraged workers, like they have looked for work in the past, but they haven't recently, or marginally attached. So there's different ways to define unemployment, but the way that we talk about it is if people have looked in the last 4 weeks. Talked about the labor force, you kind of know what that consists of now. That blue line on top represents how the labor force has changed in Minnesota, basically leading up to the pandemic. And then since the pandemic, we've seen a fall off in the labor force. And we've also seen a pretty consistent noted decline in the unemployment rate. And those two things have been pretty consistent. You can see that over the past couple months, we've actually seen an increase in the labor force, which is good because it was stagnant for several months leading up to that. But we hope that that continues. This is how some of those same things compare across planning region. We don't have necessarily the same exact trends in every area of the state. So we are constantly comparing and looking at different trends in different regions. Northeast Minnesota tends to have higher unemployment than other regions. Some of that is the more seasonal workforce we have up here in construction, mining, leisure and hospitality, et cetera. So we typically tend to have some higher unemployment. But that said, we've also seen our labor force decline a little bit faster than other regions of the state. So you kind of put those together and we get a little more of an exacerbation of some of the labor market issues we've been seeing. Talk a little bit about industry and occupational trends. One thing that a lot of folks tend to get mixed up is what an industry is versus an occupation. An industry simply is what the business or the employer does. So you're a manufacturer, or if you're a hospital, you're in healthcare and social assistance. If you're a bar or a restaurant, you're an accommodation and food service. If you're a construction company, a contractor in construction, if you're a mining company, you're mining. Occupation is what the individual workers do. So I'm a welder. I am a production assistant. I am a certified nursing assistant, and I work in healthcare support. So the examples I'm listing here in occupation are occupational groups. So grouping what those different workers do into kind of larger groups. We call those occupational groups. And then on the left, the industry sectors. So you can see some of them are kind of similar, like construction and extraction, similar to construction and mining and industry. But then you have a few others that don't necessarily match up. The industries don't necessarily equal the occupation. A good example I like to throw out is you can work in the healthcare industry or work at a business that's in the healthcare industry, such as a hospital, but you could be working in food service at the hospital. So not all healthcare occupations necessarily work at healthcare industries and vice versa. Speaking of industries, we have data sources that can tell us different age group trends. So what this is showing here is from 2015 to 2020, what the share of 55-year-old workers has done for industries. And pretty much for every industry other than a couple, we've seen the share of 55-year-old workers increase by industry. So we have an aging population, we have an aging workforce, and we see that in these data here. The only one that saw a decline, interestingly, was mining, and I think there was a very small decline in educational services as well. There's some pandemic effects in there, but it is interesting to see that largely we are having an older workforce. Little bit of information that also we can share is by race and ethnicity. So, you know, quarterly employment, we can show how different employment groups by race and ethnicity have changed as well, whether they have changed. What this is showing here is that every group other than white has actually added to their employment between 2015 and 2020. White employment has actually fallen. So the groups of color have buoyed employment growth and made it so it hasn't fallen as much as it otherwise would have if we had been a less diverse state and in workforce. This is just overall employment trends over the past 30 plus years. You see we've had pretty strong employment growth for periods on either side of the Great Recession. And then you can see that in basically 2 months, we lost what equated to about 20 plus years of employment. So the pandemic really had a drastic effect on the workforce, both in Minnesota, but nationwide. How have we recovered in Northeast Minnesota? We're about 95% of the employment we had when we started. So we're getting there, but the recovery is slowing down a little bit. We're adding about 2,200 jobs per quarter. And we've recovered about 13,000 of the 16,000 jobs that we lost in that Q2 of 2020. Again, don't try and take in all the information in this table. This is just to show the type of data that are available via our QCW and quarterly workforce indicators, which is a US Census tool. What it can show is our average annual wage, the share of jobs by industry sector, the number of jobs, and then how those have changed over time. So you can see that every single industry sector in Northeast Minnesota lost jobs between 2019 and 2020, but then it's been pretty mixed from 2020 to 2021. You know, we've had some industries that saw the biggest losses. They have seen some of the biggest gains just because they've had more room to bounce back. But then you have some other industries that may not have seen such a big loss from 2019 to 2020, but continue to lose jobs the following year. This is an example of how you can dive into some of those industries to see some of those sub-industries. In healthcare and social assistance, I listed the kind of next step down in detail. So you've got, you know, ambulatory healthcare system services. It's a lot of clinics, hospitals make up 40% of healthcare and social assistant employment in Northeast Minnesota. And in manufacturing, you've got a bunch of different kind of manufacturing sub-industries. Any sort of thing you can make, you name it, it's got a manufacturing industry for it. And then occupations, this is how those industries kind of break down with most common occupations. So you've got, of course, occupations that can occur more often in certain industries. in healthcare and social assistance. Home health and personal care aides are pretty common. In manufacturing, miscellaneous assemblers and fabricators. It's more of a kind of a catch-all occupation. Machinists, industrial engineers, just kind of meant to show the variety of different occupations that can exist in across industries. Job vacancy survey I mentioned earlier. It's been a very relevant tool, and it's very useful for us to combine with some other data we share to show just how tight the labor market has become. So what this chart is showing here, the thing to focus on are those black dots, which represent the number of job seekers per job vacancy. You can see back in 2009, during the Great Recession in Northeast Minnesota, we had 11 job seekers, unemployed people looking for work per open job vacancy that we estimated. So that was a very different labor market than what we have now, when we have fewer than one job seeker per vacancy. So we call it a very tight labor market now. And it's important to note that while we do have a really tight labor market, these are conditions that existed before the pandemic. They've just been exacerbated by the pandemic. So we had fewer than one job seeker per vacancy for multiple years leading into the up to the pandemic. We just have even fewer now. So we're using that small surplus. We don't have many folks left for employers to recruit, and I'm sure you've heard that from employers that you work working with. Our job vacancy survey allows us to show by industry where our job vacancies are. Healthcare and social assistance makes up kind of a bulk of our jobs, so they also reflect that in the job vacancies. Same thing with accommodation, food service, retail, trade. There's more turnover there. They're bigger industries. They tend to have more job vacancies. Then an example of how you might break this down by occupation. Statewide, there are about 5,900 job vacancies for nursing assistants in Q4 of 2021. 47% of those required post-secondary education. The median wage offer, which is a very useful piece of the JVS data, was at $16.75 hourly, and that's up about 12% over the year. So that has been growing notably, almost actually surpassing the growth of inflation. 35% of them have been part-time. 7% of those nursing assistant vacancies are temporary or seasonal. So we've seen them become more full-time, longer-term job vacancies. And 27% require 1+ year of experience, and 78% require some sort of certificate or license. All right, enough of me droning on about the data themselves. We're going to start to work through some of the tools. If you need to take a quick break, I'm just going to give you a couple minutes, and then we'll dive into the tools. So if you need to grab a quick coffee or take a bathroom break, we can do that, and I'll pause here for any questions too that anybody has. So the kind of lighter cat is Gordy, and then the black and white one is Ray Ray, for anybody that was curious. And actually, yeah, I caught one. Here he is in the fur. It's not happy with me.
Are they good workmates?
Yeah, generally. They're good lap warmers, which is not as useful today when it's pretty warm in here. Yeah, I try not to let Ray Ray know that Gordy is very popular. Ray Ray is also a very great cat, but Gordy is especially gregarious. So if you want to kind of get set up, there's a couple different ways to kind of get to Deed's data tools. One way is to just Google Deed data tools. I find that that's a preferable means to access the tools, but you can also navigate via our Deed homepage. I put some of the links here, and I'll throw them into the chat as well. All right, I threw the link into the chat for our data tools, so you can follow along. Zoom in here a little bit. And yeah, so we'll spend the rest of the time here going through the tools themselves. The first one, the first thing that I'll point out is just some navigation on the page itself. No matter what data tool you find yourself on, every home page is going to have this gray bar on the left, this navigation bar. So you can always navigate to a tool via that. So you'll see all the different tools listed here. So if you kind of get lost, that's a good way to get reoriented. You can always go back to the data tool homepage, which is at the top of the bar. On this data tool page that I put the link into, it's got a list of all the different data tools and a sentence on what they provide. The type over here summarizes that even more. And then each one has a blue link to the actual tool itself. So you can click on the tool name over the gray bar on the left, or you can click on the link itself in the table here. One thing I've done since I use these data tools so often is I've just actually added them all to a bookmark bar. So I have them all here that I can just click and get to super easily. So if you use one more often than the others, I recommend just creating a bookmark for it. And then you don't have to deal with Googling or going through the Deed website every time you want to get to a tool. We have about 2 dozen tools, 20 of which we publish and manage ourselves. And then the other ones are kind of links to other sites, such as the census or Career One Stop. It's interesting, if you've used Career One Stop before, we actually house a lot of the information, and folks and staff that work on it are either shared with our LMI office or are housed in the same place, so in the same office. So if you have any questions on Career One Stop specifically, we also can answer those because it's kind of a Minnesota product. I'm going to start with our occupational employment and wage statistics tool. So you can either find it here on the left. It's called Occupational Employment Statistics. It's since been updated to include wages. The wages have always been there, but the title has been updated. So you can either click on it here on the left or down here, Occupational Employment Statistics. Click on the right one. This is the page you should see. So we've got the right title here, Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics. This tool is super useful because it is the main source for employment estimates by occupation, but also wages. So when you're looking for, say an occupation that has a median wage X amount, this is where you can find that information. Each data tool homepage is going to look somewhat similar to this one. You're going to have the title, a brief description, there'll be either a pill here, it's like a gray pill that says use a data tool, or there'll be a little link that says data tool in the tabs. So there's two different ways. This is the home page. It's not the actual data tool itself. Most of the times you'll have a landing page, and then you have to click in one more time to get to the data tool, just so you know. There's a bunch of different documentation here, including some tutorials. So if you didn't catch everything this time, you can always go to a tool homepage, and there'll be more documentation there to navigate through more at a slower pace if you so wish. So what are some of the questions you can answer with OEWS? I mentioned it before. What is the median wage of a specific occupation? But then how does that median wage for that specific occupation differ by region? OEWS is one of the sources that does not go down to the county level. It goes to the planning region level. So to answer one of the questions at the beginning, this one does not have that capability to go down to the county level, but it does produce sub-state estimates of median wages and employment. And you can compare across those planning regions, but then you also can look a little bit more focused in metro areas. So the Duluth metro area, for example, you can compare to Rochester or St. Cloud or the Twin Cities metro area. So I'm going to click into the tool. This is what you'll see. This is the actual tool itself for OWS. You've got the list of all the different possible geographies you can look at. Statewide and nationwide are the first things that are selected by default. If you hover over the map over here and you're not sure where your county falls in, say you know what county you're interested in, but you don't know what economic development region or metropolitan statistical area that falls in or planning region, if you hover over it, it'll tell you. And then if you, let's say you're interested in St. Louis County, you can just click on it and you'll notice it populates EDR3, Northeast Minnesota, and the Duluth, Minnesota, Wisconsin MSA, because those are all the areas that St. Louis County falls into. In order to see the data that is relevant to those areas in the table below, where this is where all the data themselves are, you have to click go. If you don't click go, you won't get the areas you're looking for. So you might have them checked up here, but you're not seeing them down here. It's because you haven't clicked go yet. So click go, and then you'll see the data show up in the table by area. The first tab is median wages. That's what's shown by default. There's another tab next to it that shows employment numbers. So you can see the total for all occupations. You know, there's about 2,700 jobs in Minnesota as of last year. This says first quarter of 2022. I mentioned before, so it's representing the 3 years leading up to 2022. So it's an estimate using 3 years of data. US, about 140 million. And then you can see Northeast is the same as EDR3. That's because they are the same area. That's not always the case between EDRs and planning regions throughout the state. And then in the Duluth metropolitan statistical area, which is just St. Louis County, Carleton County, and Douglas County in Wisconsin, you can see there's fewer jobs there. And then the way that it's organized is by occupational group. So you'll see the large occupational title here. So that's occupational groups. Each one has a blue link, which takes you to a detailed occupational page. And then the SOC, that stands for Standard Occupational Classification System. That's basically the occupational coding structure. So every management occupation is going to start with 1-1 and then have more numbers after it, depending on what occupation it is. And you can drill down into each of these occupational groups by clicking on this little triangle next to each one. So that gives you all the detailed occupations within each of those occupational groups. So for example, in business and financial operations occupations, you can see all the different types of occupations, cost estimators, logisticians. I love that occupational title. And they all start with 1, 3, and then have 4 more digits. And let's say you don't know which occupational group your specific occupation is in, and you don't know which one to click on. So you don't want to search this way by just kind of drilling down into an occupational group. You have another way to search up here in this occupational bar. So let's say I'm interested in learning more about librarian. I click, type it in, click search. You'll get another bar that should give you occupations that are related to that search that you put in. So it may not be just one. I typed in librarian, but I've got library technicians, library assistants, library science teachers. So anybody that has or any occupation that kind of has a similar occupation will show up here. If it doesn't show one that you're looking for, you can adjust your search criteria, or as I'll show you, you can kind of look at the related occupations in that less related occupation and kind of search that way. So let's go with library technicians. I'll click search again, and it'll just filter out everything just down to that one individual occupation. So now we see the number of library technicians by those areas and the estimated median wages. So you can see Northeast, we make just 6 cents on average in median wage, a little bit less than the state median wage. And that just means that half of those library technicians make below $23 and half make above. And we're going to click into, so you see the blue link. Anytime you got a little blue underlined link, you can click on it. I'm going to click on that link. And what we get here is the detailed occupation page. This is probably the spot you're probably most interested in. You'll get the title, an occupational description. So it tells you kind of generally what that occupation does. And then this little table here gives you for all the areas that you had selected in the previous screen, the employment. So you saw that before. This EMP-SE, that's a standard error. So that's just showing you kind of, it's 90 plus or minus 14 is the estimate. So pretty accurate. And we don't publish anything where the standard error is more than 50% of what this estimate is. So if you don't see something, that might be why. There might just be too few and the margin of error is too high. The mean hourly pay, and then we also do the 10th, 25th median, which is the 50th percentile, 75th and 90th percentile of wages. And that can be super useful if you're talking with a job seeker who may be just starting out, or they're looking to switch into an occupation where they don't have any experience. They may not be starting out at that median wage or that 75th percentile wage. They'd probably be more likely to start somewhere in the 25th, give or take, between or the median. So if it's like their first job or something like that, it's good to know kind of what the distribution of pay is as well, based on an experience that they're taking into a specific career or occupation. This table here gives you the leading industries. So I mentioned how occupations can be different within an industry. This will tell you which industries those occupations are most likely to be in. For library technicians, public administration, and education and health services are the most common, but there are also a couple in information. But you can see that public administration and education and health services, the median wage for those industries is higher than for information. So maybe a prospective client is looking to get it to be a library technician, say you probably want to look into education and health services or public administration. So look for job openings in those two industries as opposed to information, which tend to pay library technicians less. And then you've got your median wage and employment by all those different areas that we showed on that first landing page. Some of them will have the projections, so the long-term 10-year projections. So that's also useful to see. If there's an NA here, don't worry too much. Those 10-year projections are only available for the planning region. So they're not going to show up for the metros or the EDRs or the balances. When it says Northwest balance of state, that just means it's the whole area of Northwest minus any metro that's in there. So Northeast balance of state is everything outside of St. Louis and Carleton County. And then down here, you've got some related occupations I mentioned as a different way to kind of search through to find the occupation you're interested in. Maybe you didn't see this in the search criteria on the first page, but now you're like, oh, I actually was interested in library assistants, clerical. You can click here, you notice it's underlined. That'll take you to this page for library assistants clerical. So you can see the same information for that occupation. You can kind of go back and forth between related occupations that way. And then lastly, some tasks for library technicians. So what are some routine things that you can be expected to perform if you are a library technician? So say you got in here and you were like, actually, this is not what I'm looking for at all. You can always go back to the search page, which will keep your selected areas and your search. And you can say, okay, actually, I want to start over. Just note that when you click clear, you're clearing the areas and the occupations. So you'll have to select your areas again. That's kind of a pain, but when you clear, you just have to start with the areas and then go back into searching for occupations. You can view checked only. So if you had selected more than one occupation, you can filter to that. And then lastly, you can download the data that you show in this table. It will not do just one occupation. It'll do all occupations for the areas you have listed. So that's more for, I think, larger analysis. You won't get just the one occupation. And that I can show you what that download looks like. It comes out in Excel. You can see I've downloaded a lot of them. It titled that one occupation results 44. I do this pretty often. So you can see the area name, the period year. It's always going to be first quarter. Those SOC codes we talked about, which level. So if it's occupational group, it'll be 2. If it's an occupation detail, it'll be 6. The title, and then you have the employment count, hourly mean, median, those percentiles, and then the same thing for annual mean, median, and then those percentiles. Not all of them will have all of the data. That's just, based off of whether there are enough in the sample, et cetera. And then for some of the educational occupations, I'll scroll down real quick. They only produce, these are all teachers or educators. They only have the annual because they don't work a full 12 months, typically, these occupations. So they don't have the hourly rate. They just have what you would make for the time that you would be working in school, like basically during school. So not for including the summer months. All right. So any questions on OEWS? Great. So this is kind of the core occupational source of information. I'm going to be talking about some other tools, and they all kind of reference, wages. If they have wages in them, they're pulling it from OEWS. If they have number of jobs per occupation, likely pulled from OEWS as well. So this is a great central source to go to. That said, I mentioned a lot of the power comes from comparing with other tools. So the next tool I'm going to go to, and you can go back to the OEWS home by clicking this link. That'll take you to the tool landing page, and each tool will have that option. The next one we're going to look at, and this one I'm going to touch on just real quickly. I think it's important to touch, but cost of living is the tool we're going to go to next. And I think this one is great to talk about because it's really powerful to put what you could make with a given occupation versus some of the basic needs cost of living that you could expect. This tool has a really detailed methodology that I don't really have time to go into right now, but what it does is it gives you monthly estimated costs by county. So this one does go down to county. It also produces it by state and by planning region for different family types. So you can get an estimated basic needs cost for childcare, food, healthcare, housing, transportation, other, which is like clothes and things like that, and then taxes. The one thing I'll note is that given the really recent kind of explosion of inflation. These data are lagging a little bit, so they're not going to capture that really recent growth of costs and prices. But it is a great place to kind of start, especially if you're working with somebody that hasn't really worked a lot with costs, maybe a student or someone that doesn't really have a great grasp on what things cost yet. This is a great thing to share. Say like, okay, you want to be a machinist. That's awesome. Let's see what your hourly wage can kind of get you in terms of covering typical costs. And these are basic needs. So it's not poverty, but it's also not middle class. It's kind of somewhere in between. So it's useful, but it's not going to cover, say paying for necessarily your phone bill, or paying for Netflix, or going out to movies, or buying that 6-pack of beer at the end of the week. It'll cover most of the things that you kind of just need to get by. So this is the tool itself. You don't need to click into another the pill or anything like I showed you, EWS. So you can choose your area, EDR, planning region, or state. Planning region I find to be probably the most useful. You have most data going into it. You choose your family type. So you can either be single, partnered with one full-time worker, so the other one stays home full-time is the assumption. Partnered with one full-time worker, one part-time. So that would be one full-time, one half-time. And then partnered, 2 full-time workers. And then you can choose how many children you have. And these costs will all change based off what you're clicking up here. And so, for example, if you are single and have 1 child in Northeast Minnesota, so that'd be right here, your estimated basic needs yearly cost to cover would be about $48,000. And the hourly wage you estimated need to cover those costs would be $23 an hour. If you remember back to library technicians, that median wage was about $23 an hour. So that'll be just about what you need to cover your costs if you're a single parent of 1 kid. I'm going to pull up kind of a visual way to show this too. Cameron, my boss, gave a training like this the other day, and the server was down, and so he couldn't go into any of the tools. So he had, thankfully, all of the screenshots to go back on. But oh my goodness, if he hadn't, that would have been quite not a lot to talk about in 3 hours if you can't show anything. So this is an example. Liz pointed out Hennepin and Ramsey counties. Cost of living does vary by area, and that's probably the biggest thing. If maybe they're not exact, like you might say, like, wow, that cost for childcare doesn't really line up with what I've been seeing in person. These are average, and they do lag a little bit, but when you're comparing region to region, you really get some usefulness out of it. And then this is for Northeast. What you're seeing here, I've got all the different occupational groups, and I've got your single, no children, your typical requirement to cover your costs is $14.07 an hour. Okay, so given that, to cover your basic needs costs, which occupational groups and percentiles can you get by occupational group to cover those costs? The ones that are highlighted here are below that $14.07 an hour, so those wouldn't get you to where you need to go. For example, food preparation and serving related, you can see here that you don't quite get, even the median wage doesn't cover that $14.07 that you would need to kind of get those costs. So it's just like a kind of a useful thought experiment. That's not to say that all jobs in food preparation and serving related won't get you where you need to go. It's just saying your odds are better if you're in a different occupational group. Lisa makes a good point. The different jobs that are available do differ by area. So it's not as simple as saying like, oh, this occupational group isn't paying on average what we need to make our costs. Let's go just to another one. I know it's more complicated than that. And then if you go up, so this is for that typical family, 1 full-time, 1 half-time parent with 1 kid. You see that the options get even more a little diminished. You need to make $16.33 on average between those 2 parents per hour. And even the 75th percentile wage of food prep and serving related is not high enough to meet those costs. And then finally, if you're a single parent with 2 kids, you really kind of get squeezed a little bit in terms of which wages are going to be enough to meet your costs or your estimated costs. Granted, if you have someone that's able to help you out with rent or help, your house is paid for, that diminishes your monthly cost. Things are different family to family, but this is just a way to show that, options can be limited based off of, what kind of job you're looking to get. All right, any questions on cost of living? I'm gonna keep rolling on here if not, but please stop me if you have any questions. It is a cool tool. And the methodology, I think, is like 15 pages long. If you want to know how, we have a woman in our office that helped design it, and it's really, really detailed, pulling from so many different sources. And, I was curious how we estimated these, and the methodology is super sound, super reasonable. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out on those. Happy to answer them. But we only have a half hour left, so I'm going to keep going. The next tool, so you can navigate again on that gray bar, we're going to go to the job vacancy survey. I mentioned that the job vacancy survey happens twice a year, and it's meant to give us kind of a look into what employers are hiring for, how many job vacancies there are, and then the nature of those job vacancies, which occupational groups, what industries, how much are they offering, what are the requirements. It's really a useful survey. It's super labor intensive for us to get all these information because we do have to reach out directly to, I think it's about 6,400 employers each year, all over Minnesota, just to get a good representation. And that's, calling, emailing, sending snail mail, any way we can get. But we have a pretty good response rate, 75% response rate as of last measure. So we got some good information from the job vacancy survey each year. And this is one of those things that's a great example of how the Minnesota LMI office kind of goes above and beyond. This is not a common thing that is across a lot of other states. Thank you, Liz. Yes, so that is a new thing, using scraping websites and using minnesotaworks.net. We've incorporated those job postings into job vacancy as well. So that is new as of the last couple of years, but it is super powerful. So we're able to pick jobs off of minnesotaworks.net, job postings. Also, some of those large employers in the state, University of Minnesota, Walmart, McDonald's, we pull all of their job postings that they put online as well, and then those data go into this as well. So a lot of different sources, but the original is still there, calling, just asking people. Yeah, exactly. More reason, better data for us and for you if they participate and post jobs on Minnesota Works. So thank you for the plug. So let me show you this one. To get into the data tool, you click on the little link that says data tool up here. Again, you'll get a table that pops up with a default. The default is going to be statewide, so Minnesota. It's going to be by occupation. So you'll see those occupational groups that we talked about in OEWS again. And it's going to be all. But you have the option to either look by industry or firm size. So that's just how many people do the business employ. So you can look at these data by that as well. Whether those are part-time or full-time. And then you can select your period over here. And we go back all the way to 2001. So we've been doing this for over 20 years, or for 20 years. So there's a lot of good information in here. And all you have to do to change within this view here is just click. So if you select the radio button for industry, it'll just change it to industry, change it by firm size, get it by firm size. You can see the different breakdowns here. And then if you want to look part-time, you can do that. You'll notice that part-time is NA here because they're all part-time. These would all be 100%. And then full-time, Again, you'll see none of them are part-time, but some of them are temporary and seasonal. So going across the table here, you've got your SOC code. So again, that's your occupational code, the title of the occupational group, or if you drill down, you get the detailed occupations within there, the number of job vacancies. So this 214 as of Q2 2021 is a all-time high. We had 205,000 in Q2 2021, so we keep getting more job vacancies, but we mentioned that there's fewer unemployed people, so that's where that tightness of the labor market comes. Our job vacancy rate, so this is just a ratio of the number of job vacancies to the number of filled jobs. 8.2% is pretty high historically, but that makes sense given that we have a historical high of job vacancies. The share that are part-time, the share that are temp or seasonal, requiring post-secondary education, requiring 1 year or more of experience, the percent that require a certificate or license, and then importantly, that median wage offer. So the median wage offer for all occupations Q4 2021 was $18.09. That'll vary, of course, by occupation. You can see in computer and math occupations, pretty high median wage offers there. They're almost all $35 or higher. A lot of them are over 40. So you'll see how that differs by different occupational group or industry. And then this button up here, if you want to see some more vacancy details, you can click into it, and then you get some of that educational requirement broken down. So what percent of those job postings or vacancies require high school or GED, have no educational requirement, a vocational training, associate, bachelor, advanced. So sometimes it's interesting to look in here because the one that's listed may just be the highest share, but it might be, say here, 34% have high school or GED, but 21% require vocational training, and it might be nice to know that detail. The work experience required, less than 1 year, 1 to 3, 4+, and then you got those wage percentiles. So you can see if you wanted to, you could look at the job vacancy postings and the wage offers by percentile for an occupation versus what they are for a filled occupations via OEWS. And then this is also useful, what percentage of those are offering healthcare. So say you can go to back results to the main page. Say you want to look at a region other than just Minnesota. Click on change area up there on the left, and then you have those two options that we talked about before, industry, firm size, part or full. But you can also go into another area. It has zip code listed here, but again, it doesn't go down to the zip code area. We're limited to the planning region in this one. It used to include EDR, but now it's planning region is the smallest we can go to. But if you click on any of these other spots, it'll bring you to the correct planning region. So I click planning region here. Let's say I want to see how Northeast compares to state, and I also want Northwest. You just click on them. You can also use this to click. And then you can view data. If you want to remove one, you have to select it and just select, remove, selected, or clear all to start over. But I want to look at all three of these. And what you do is you'll get one table for each of those areas. So statewide on top, then you got Northeast, and you got Northwest. So you can kind of compare and contrast by occupational group or by industry. You can change that up here too. But the only way to change the actual area is to go in this change area button. Oh, good question from Rhonda. How do you handle remote positions? So I think that is probably going to be a question that is added to the survey at some point. The way that this is right now, so let's say there's an employer in Duluth that is hiring remotely. Those jobs will be posted in here as if they exist physically in Duluth. So there's no good way to differentiate between remote and in person. So that's a great question. These data aren't going to show that difference yet. And I think there's a lot of sources of information that struggle with that as well. So yeah, there's no way to tell via this via job vacancy survey as it is currently, but it definitely is something that the folks who run the survey are thinking of. Yeah, so widening your search is one way. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, so kind of looking like there may be a job in Southeast Minnesota for somebody that's living in Northeast Minnesota. So the searching by areas, maybe you have to widen your range a little bit. That's one way. Yep. Yeah, thanks, Lisa. That's one way to kind of get around the burgeoning remote work. It is good though, right? Like it offers more flexibility to job seekers. So this JVS, and you can export the results. Again, that goes into a Excel file or a CSV file. I'll show you what it looks like. It's not as well labeled. It's got, you can kind of figure out what each of these titles mean. It's in the same order that it's shown in the table on the website, so you can line it up. But if you have any questions on handling any of these exports, I'm happy to talk to you about that. It'll pop it out by area. So it'll list all of the vacancies by area. So you'll get Minnesota and then Northeast and then Northwest. But that could be another way if you want to do some more in-depth analysis. All right, job vacancy questions before I move on. Okay, so I'm going to go back to JVS Home on this blue bar up top. You can also just hit the back button, I think, a few times to get here. And on the left, I'm going to navigate to what we call occupations in demand. So it's down here. I'll click on that. And this one's interesting. So it pulls together data from two of the previous tools, OEWS and JVS. And what the power of occupations in demand is it creates a measure of are these occupations in demand currently relative to other occupations by region. So this is a regionally available data source, and it can answer questions like how many occupations that typically require an associate degree have the highest demand. What are they? So we can break down different occupations by area based off of their educational requirement, how much they pay, their median wage, and what their educational requirements are. So you click into it using the little pill, and it'll pop up again with a table that is defaulted to show the state of Minnesota, and it's going to show all the occupations that we have created demand for. You'll see in the table the SOC code, which you're becoming more familiar with, the job title, occupational title, its current demand rank, the current demand indicator, and it'll be stars. So that's 1 to 5 stars. What I'll say is that we have this current demand rank, but the current demand indicator is the important part. And whether it's 3, 4, or 5 stars is more important than if it's 3 versus 5. So if it's 3 or more stars, we consider that to be above average demand, high demand. 25th percentile wage and median wage. So if you're trying to get into an occupation that's in demand and you're new into that occupation, entry level, etc., we include the 25th percentile as a good measure of somebody entering that. And then we also include the projected 10-year growth rate, projected 10-year openings, because you could have a job that's declining, like retail salespersons, but there's still going to be 100,000 openings due to turnover, retirements, etc., over the next 10 years. So just because you see this negative growth rate here, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be opportunity or demand for that occupation, especially for something as big as retail salesperson. Got a question here from Brenda. Does the SOC codes in any way correlate to NAICS? No, great question. So SOC is the occupational version of NAICS, and NAICS is the North American Industry Classification System. So basically they're doing the same thing, but SOC is for occupations, so what the worker does, and NAICS is for industries, what the business does. So you'll have numbers, like 6-digit numbers as well in NAICS, and that is going to be relevant to the industry, and the SOC is relevant to just the occupation itself. So great question, and that ties back to the industry versus occupations. And a lot of them have some of the similar terminology between them, so it can get a little confusing. So thank you for asking that. These are SOC codes here. If you're talking about industries, like in QCEW, that'll be NAICS codes. But anything that has occupations is going to have SOC. Educational requirements talked about, so that's the typical education. If you have any question on what these represent to later, you can always hover over the question mark and it tells you what it means. And then on the job training requirements, you know, short term, long term, what are some of the other moderate term on the job training. So it's just meant to show you, like, typically what can you expect if you get on the job in terms of training. And it's ranked by current demand. So you can see registered nurses is the most in-demand job in Minnesota as of 2021. Oh, yeah, this is, you can see where it's updated down here. So January of 2022. So these data are relevant to 2021. And you could filter a little bit more if you, let's say you don't want to just go through the whole list of all by demand. Let's say you want to search for a specific occupation, you can do that. You can also search by educational category. So let's say you're just interested in those jobs that have vocational training, and you want those that don't pay the lowest kind of category of wage, but maybe closer to the like the middle range of wages. Click there, 37 to 57. And then you can click get filtered results. And what it will show is all of those that offer here, you know, vocational training also can be called post-secondary non-degree award. So it's a little different in that what's in the drop down versus what's actually listed here, but those are covering the same thing. And you can see nursing assistants, LPNs, medical assistants. So some good like healthcare occupations in there, but then also automotive service, machinists, some, you know, maintenance and repair type occupations, and, you know, pretty good wages for those relative to the training that's required. So you can kind of search and filter that way based off of education and wage, because I know a lot of times you're looking for a job that has to be in demand, that has to have above average wage, so high wage, high demand, and then high growth. You can find those occupations via this tool. And you can also, I mentioned, go by region. So let's say, and you can look at one region at a time. Northeast Minnesota, you either click on the map or click on the list here, view data, and you'll get the same thing, but for that region that you're interested in. There won't be as many occupations for some of the regions, just because there aren't as many occupation data to estimate the demand. So sometimes you'll have fewer occupations in a outstate region as you will compared to the state, just for your knowledge. And then you can also filter based off, let's say you just want to look at the high demand. So you can click here, show only 3 through 5 stars. So this will just give you the above average demand. So if you were to scroll all the way down, the lowest you'll see is 3 stars. If you ever see a little red pill that says US, that means those wages are based off of US wages. There's a Minnesota one. That just means we don't have good wage estimates for the region specifically, so it reverts to the next largest. And if you are interested in learning more about any of these other occupations, let's say you're, registered nurses, person's interested, they want to learn more, you click on that link, click on that title, and it takes you to that occupational employment wage statistics detailed occupation page that we covered in OEWS. And it opens up in a new tab, so you don't have to go back. And if you want to include all back, you just click that button, and you can either export all, which is the 1 through 5, or you can just export the above average demand. And I'll show you what that looks like. Again, not the most intuitive like output in the Excel file, but it is super useful to have all the information kind of in one place. At least the titles are a little bit easier to follow. And again, they're just organized the same way that you'll see it in the table on the website. It gives you the SOC code, the title, current demand rate, how many stars, those wages. It won't tell you where it is, so you just have to know what region or state that you're downloading it for. All right, any questions on OID or occupations in demand? It's a good tool. And one thing I'm going to go back to the OID home here. We do have another tool that kind of covers a lot of the same stuff as OID. It's called Career Pathways. And for some folks, it's preferred because it's just a Tableau visualization. I'm going to click into Career Pathways real quick to show you just real briefly because it's some of the same information. So this is the tool for Career Pathways. It's this Tableau viz, but it's interactive. So if you know what career cluster somebody is interested in or you're interested in, you can click on these here. So hospitality, tourism, let's say you're interested in the health science career cluster. When you click on that, it'll filter out all the occupations, filter just to those that are in the health, ranked by demand. So you recognize this from the OID. This is like 5 stars, 4 stars, and then the occupational rank, the occupation name, what's the typical educational requirement, and then if you hover over the bar, you get, how many are employed in the region that you have selected, what the cluster is, the demand, the projected growth, and the 25th, 75th percentile wages. And if you're super interested in that and you want to learn a little more, you can click on the title here itself, and that'll take you to the Career Force MN occupational page, which is great because a lot of them will have videos that can give you, an even more kind of interactive idea of the occupation. Because sometimes looking at data is not going to get you the narrative that you want with a job seeker. Like, hey, this is more engaging. We go watch a video, a 1.5-minute video. So Career Force has those, as well as a lot of the information. A lot of these data here are pulled from our website. You'll also get some of this licensing info and different educational requirements, which is super useful, and you can go through the different regions as well. So a lot of the same data comes from our sources, but maybe in a format that's more intuitive or pleasing for you. So this is another option. I really don't mind where you get the information as long as it's accurate. If this is preferred and you want to go this way, that's also really cool. Back to the Career Pathways page, and I'll just say you can filter by region, you can search by occupation, and you can do it by education as well. I want to get to one more, maybe two if I'm fast. Career and Education Explorer is one that is used by a lot of folks, especially job counselors, because it pulls a lot of the stuff we just talked about in all these tools and then connects it to training, to educational opportunities. So it's a very powerful tool for that reason. Career and Education Explorer, you got to click the pill to get into it. So it does use a lot of that occupational data we've been showing. This is what the first page looks like when you click into the tool. You can go back here. You can either explore by education or career. The career side is more of what we manage in LMI, so I'm just going to focus on that for this time, but you can also explore through education. So say if you know what somebody is studying and you want to look for careers related to that, you can do it that way as well. But you typically, I think, is what you come across is somebody has a goal, occupation, or career in mind, and they want to know, how do I get there? Or like, what do I need to get there? What can I expect if I do get there? So that's what Explore Careers will get you. So I'm going to click on Explore Careers. The first page will give you 2 ways to search by occupation, which is step 1. You can either type it in. So let's say got someone that wants to be a welder, or let's do radiologic tech. I spelled that right. Hit search, you type it in, hit enter, and this bar will pop up, and it again will have what it deems to be related occupations. I'm looking for technologists and technicians, so I click on that. And then once this is populated here, you move to step 2, which is you choose your area. You can either do statewide or local region. I'm going to choose local region. So it has a list of counties here. These data do not go down to the county. They're to the region again. If you do not know what region you're in, this is useful because if you click on a county, it'll pop you into the correct region. So I choose Aiken, and it gets me the EDR3 Arrowhead. So that's the economic development region that we're looking for. If you're, choose a different county, it gives you the corresponding EDR. So you don't need to know which EDR you're in. You just need to know what county you're interested in. But if you do, you can search that way as well. I'm going to hit go now that I've got my area and I've got my occupation. And it'll take you to the Explore Careers Overview page. So this page has a little bit of everything we've been talking about. Data from that occupational page, so a description of what those rad techs do, what area you're looking at, some typical job titles. So maybe they don't know it as a rad tech, they might know it as something else. So you can look for some other typical job titles just to make sure you're kind of on the same page. That 25th to 75th percentile wage, the demand from our occupations and demand tool. High demand, we're expecting 229 occupations over the next 10 years. It's useful to break that down, okay, that's about 23 openings per year on average. It's maybe a little easier to digest. What's a typical wage, a typical industry, education, health care? It makes sense that most of these are going to be in healthcare. The typical wage, $30.54. Without employment, again, that's also from OEWS. Educational requirements, you'll get these here. Sometimes the educational requirements aren't updated. You might get an NA if there aren't educational requirements, or they are not updated from the educational side. But related education typically is. So let's say you're interested in finding a little bit more about what you need to do to get to become a rad tech. You can click on this link or one of those links, and it will show relevant training via the eligible training provider list of the ETPL that are available in the area. So you've got a rad tech program, Lake Superior College. You can click into, there's a link here, and it gives you more information on that program, where it is, the website, description, a whole bunch, whether it's WIOA certified, which is of course super important for a lot of folks, how many credits, how much you can expect to pay. I don't know how often this is updated. I think it's updated relatively often, but it might just be like an annual thing. And then down here, super interesting, we've got some employment outcomes information. So this is via our graduate employment outcomes, and it tells you the share of students from this program or from that school, depending on how many grads they have, how many are employed in Minnesota second quarter after exit. So some, a good amount are employed pretty quickly, and then what they can expect to make in their median wage after 6 months. And their average wage after 6 months. So you get some kind of outcomes on what happens to graduates right after they graduate, soon after they graduate, which could be useful for folks, and how many completions. And then if you know the OHA, Office of Higher Education code, program code, you get all that information there as well. So a lot of detail on the education part, which is kind of the power of the Career and Education Explorer. For some of the more common occupations, or in say like a metro which has more programs, you'll get more data listed here for programs, and then you can compare the trainings. So you can see like how much they cost across and compare that length of program, as Sheila or Lisa talked about. So maybe there's different lengths of study that people can compare. Sheila asked the question, does this tool provide more info than Career One Stop or other career exploration sites? It provides a lot of the same information. It's just how you prefer to get to it. And this is the source from Deed. So a lot of those other sites will be pulling from the information that we have, and I can't vouch necessarily that they'll be updating it as often as Career and Education Explorer will be, but they will be largely sharing the same information. So you can go back to career results. There are 5 other tabs which go into detail. A lot of these are things that you've seen via those other tools. So wages will be from OEWS, demand will be that OID, occupation and demand piece, education, you've seen the typical education components, but something that is additional here, and it's not populated here, but it'll give you the distribution of typical education of people holding the job, not necessarily what you need to get the job, but it's also useful to see what share have, say, a high school diploma versus associate's degree in the job. Okay, so got 1 minute left. I just want to thank you for the folks that have to drop off. I know there's a hard stop. I'm going to stay on, so if you have any questions, I'm just going to wrap up Career and Education Explorer and just show this other compare skills tool real quick that's pretty new. So I really appreciate you hanging out with me today, and I'll share out all these links as well as my presentation for you to review. And just know that there's a lot of information available. You can always reach out to me if you know it's tough to absorb all this information. I'm shooting through a fire hose at you. So please reach out if you have any questions. I'm very, very thankful, but also very willing to help folks out on an individual basis. So just know that I'm a resource, and thank you for those that do have to jump off. I appreciate you being here and expect an email from me following up with more information. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to just answer questions right now too, if folks have any. All right, I'm just going to finish up this Career and Education Explorer piece. I did cover most of it, but if you want to print the data that you've been looking for, you can also do that. It's the Print All tab. It'll pop up a little print. So if you want to give them something physical to take home with them with all these different data, it gives you the overview page. It gives you all the related education, the different certifications that are related. There's a lot for rad techs, but you'll notice that most of them are through the American Registry of Radiologic Technologists. You know, those typical tasks, abilities, skills match. So if they're looking for other ones, maybe there's some other out there that pay more, that they're a pretty strong skills match. They can look here to see that. Just a lot of different pieces of data. It really depends on, you know, what folks are interested in, but I think that's the power of Career and Education Explorer, is there has pretty much everything relevant to a career pathway and career exploration. So you can print all that information that way. And you can also apply for jobs. So if you click on apply for jobs, it takes you to Career One Stop, which was mentioned, and it's got, it uses the SOC code to search for the jobs that are in the area. And this is default to Minnesota here. And then we're using the National Labor Exchange. So you've got all the different job postings recently up there. It's a ton here for rad techs. You can see there's 712 jobs that are found in Minnesota that share some title or some connection to rad techs. So it's also useful to click on that to kind of just see what is the current posting demand, because you know we've got our occupations in demand, that lags a little bit. What's a true representation of what demand is today? How many job postings are out there? So this is another great tool that I recommend, and Career One Stop is a fantastic site to do so. Okay, any questions on Career and Education Explorer? So I got one last thing I'll show you, and then let you guys have your day back. All right, so the one thing I wanted to show you last is the new Compare Skills tool via Career Force. So this isn't on our Deed Data Tools page. I'll make sure to share the link with you. I'll just do it right here too. This is a new tool, and it's similar to our match skills to experience tool. It's on our data tools page, but I think this one is maybe a little bit better because it is maybe a little bit more applicable to an actual job seeker in the way that they're trying to think about exploring different careers and switch careers. So you first of all type in your experience via an occupation. So let's say you've got a welder that came into you. You type that in, it'll pop up with the most relevant occupation, the actual like occupational title. Type in your location. So let's say they're in Duluth. You got to make sure to include the state there, and then click on it. And then all you do is just hit compare skills. And what will populate first is this tab called compare to in-demand careers. So based off of skills matching, you're going to get different occupations ranked by that match. So 82% match means there's a lot of shared skills between welders and laborers and freight stock and material movers hand. And you can show that detailed skills comparison here, which is, I think, really useful when you're walking through kind of that process of considering different occupations and changing, because there may be some that people think is like, oh, that's a really, that switch makes sense to me. Like I'm a welder and then I'm going to become some other sort of maintenance technician. That kind of is really easy. But what might be harder is say like, oh, I'm a cashier and I make the hop into a healthcare support profession. You can show how a lot of those interpersonal skills that a lot of cashiers or retail salespeople have can be really directly applicable to some healthcare occupations. And this is a great way to really show that. So you can compare to in-demand careers. So these are careers that have good matches and are in demand. And then you show, where your skills maybe need to be developed more versus where your skills match up really well, or you're maybe even a little overqualified. So that's a good discussion to be having. And then you can also compare to just straight up best skills matches. So not necessarily in demand, but maybe just the best kind of connection to another occupation. Yep. So it makes sense that, welding, soldering, and brazing machine setters. So you basically operating a welding machine as opposed to just being a welder. You can see it's a great match there, but the regional demand is not super high. So it might not be the best option. But you've got all these other ones, and you can see the regional demand with them. There isn't it isn't populated for all of them because there might not be enough occupations to develop that regional demand. But this is coming from the same source that we use to create our occupations and demand tool. And then the last tab, which is super useful, is let's say you have an occupation that you're interested in that you want to switch to, and you want to know how your skills you have in your current occupation match up with the skills in another one. So let's say it's an engineering technician. And let's see if I can. Yes. There's a lot of options here. I'm going to go civil engineering, technologist, and technician. So you can see the skills match is not super high, and then you can check to see where the biggest deficits are. But where there's matches, so there still are matches. And just talking through, how you might develop those skills, where they need to be developed more. And where you can really kind of highlight the skills you do have that are transferable. And that's how Rhonda said, this can be helpful for folks to write their resume. That is exactly right. You can really, everyone has access. Yeah, everyone has access to this. Yep. Yeah. So these are all of everything I've shown you is publicly available. It's just a matter of knowing it exists, really. So I'll send out all these links with little explanations on them. But yeah, there's a ton of information out there. Sometimes the problem is that there's too much and you just don't know where to go for the source that is most relevant to you. I find that if you find one that works and it works for you, instead of just getting overloaded by do I use career and education support or do I use OID? Find the one that works best for you. And then when you have questions, I can help you get to the other stuff. So thank you for that question, Lisa. I'm going to wrap it up here and just kind of open it up for any questions. As long as people want to hang out, you're welcome to. Now it'll just kind of be conversation and question answering period. I will say I didn't even touch on a lot of those like industry tools like QCW, because that is, while super important, isn't the kind of the most useful to job seekers or people working with job seekers. I use QCW a ton when I'm working with businesses to show like industry trends, or with economic development groups to show industry trends. But when you're working with job seekers, your job counselor, it's not as relevant. You may be able to show somebody like, oh, the information sector is really on a long-term decline, so maybe you want to consider a different industry if they're looking at an industry like that. But other than that, it's not as useful. Yeah, well, thank you all so much for coming today. I really appreciate it, and I hope you learned something. I know I packed a ton of information in there, but I really enjoyed the virtual mode of this. I think it's a very effective way to get information out quickly, you know? So, all right, Lisa, I'll see you on Thursday. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a great day.